Take two.
I'm so sorry. So we've talked about a few categories of barriers, and I think, once you identify the barrier, that is one phase. The next step is, hey, these are the barriers, this is how we're going to get over them.
Right.
So for example, the corporate culture barrier, I think that it's extremely important to engage from the top.
Yes.
Because most often culture in an organization is driven from the top.
Yes.
And so you engage the key stakeholders, the CXOs in that organization that own that business, right? And help utilize them, leverage them to drive that culture change from the top. Because again, if you're hoping for the best, right? You're saying this
Hope
is
isn't a strategy, is that what you're saying?
It's not. It really is not. And again, this is it's common knowledge, but again, it's so amazing how many times you see that this is not taken care of.
Right.
It's people just install stuff and hope for the best. It's like, no, you can't do that. You spent this much money, right, acquiring this solution. The least you could do is make sure it's getting used, and how to drive that change that we've discussed from a people point of view is make sure that the people that they look to for leadership are actively promoting the solution and saying, this is the direction for the company going forward.
Right.
This is how we're going to get there, and this is how these solutions are going to help us get there, right? Is that something that you find to be generally true as well? Is, engaging from the top?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's essential. And I think, to your point around culture and how culture is sort of shared through the organization, how it's experienced through the organization, it has to start with the executive leadership team, setting a tone, setting expectations. And when it comes to software adoption and technology adoption in general, for customers who are on that digitization journey, I think it's about, again, coming back to what we talked about earlier around, if you're going to take down barriers and you're going to do it effectively, you have to help people to understand why. And you have to help people to understand how. And so I think it's really important that at the senior executive levels, which is typically where we're dealing in terms of the sales cycle, right? We're often, when you're looking at going pervasively across, multi-domain, multi-architecture type of strategy with a customer, you're at that CXO level, obviously, right? You're talking to the CIO, the CFO is always involved, and so on. And I think, it's important for those stakeholders in the organization to then take that messaging and it kind of proliferates.
Yeah.
Say that 3 times fast.
Proliferates.
Through the organization. And I think, that's key. Again, setting expectations with the leaders and then with their teams around, timeframes and support from the organization. And so we came back to, when we talked about at the beginning, sort of the 3 barriers. One of the barriers I mentioned was support from the organization.
That's right.
And I think you're absolutely right. If you're going to remove that barrier, it's got to be starting with the executive team, messaging that we're on board. We've got your back. It's going to be a little bit bumpy at times potentially, but we're going to get there, and here's how we're going to get there. So visibility, roadmap, and support is really key.
And that's very closely related to the next barrier that I wanted to touch on, which is the business barrier.
Right.
Because the way to get over that is to constantly highlight the value that they're getting from the solution to the business owners, right? To the line of business managers who have a vested interest in seeing this work. And so if, you're going to really get them on your side, the best way to do that is to constantly say, hey, this is what you're getting out of this, just so you know.
Right.
This is how you were performing earlier, and this is where you are now.
Where you are today.
Right.
And how do you do that? Data.
There's no getting around the data.
Yeah, it comes back to, your whole notion of having that success manager deployed, using the data, the tetration. I think it's really important that, that cadence is in place, and that the cadence has visibility not only to the first line managers and their organizations, but all the way up through to the CXO level of the organization. And that's really key, right? And you can highlight the wins and you can highlight the changes as you go.
That's right.
And that keeps people motivated as well. It keeps people feeling like the journey is worth it, that they're seeing the benefits. They're recognizing that they're more productive. They've got cost efficiencies, et cetera. And the value is realized at every step through the journey. So that's really critical.
Right.
Yeah.
And a key common operational barrier is people just not knowing how to use stuff.
Sure, absolutely.
So how important do you think end user trainings are in overcoming this specific type of barrier?
Key, isn't it? It's
right.
key.
Because again, the software or the solution could be perfect, but if you don't know how to use it, most people would just try once and just give it up. They say, look, we had a system for doing this before that was less complicated. We don't understand this. And so, you know, making sure that they have, you know, end user trainings, making sure that they have, you know, feature lists of the solution, making sure they understand exactly what this can accomplish and how to use it, I think is also critically important to the success of the solution, right?
So I have a couple thoughts on that. So the first thing I'm thinking about is multi-generational. So, you know, you mentioned people who say, well, we've always done it this way.
The workplace has never been so diverse in terms of generation gaps.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's important to consider from a cultural perspective as well as you work through change management, because you'll have one generation that will be very open to change management, very comfortable with it, very savvy. And then there'll be other generations that are less comfortable. And, you know, we've all heard it, this is not how we do it. We've always done it this way. We don't want to do it that way. So I think it's really important to, you know, one of the things we've seen as a best practice is to have small user groups. So you're taking multi-generations and you're putting them together. You're taking multi kind of, you know, departmental stakeholders, right? So you might have somebody in finance and somebody in marketing and somebody in HR, and you're putting everybody together and you're helping everyone learn in groups whereby they can understand, okay, you know, you're going to help me with this, I'm going to help you with that. And I think, you know, if you can create those kind of cohorts inside the organization, sort of test beds, if you will, that's been successful as well. But again, you know, each line of business will deploy and will garner and glean different value, kind of, you know, different maybe operational efficiencies. They'll see things differently, but I think it's really important that as an organization, you know, the operations piece is key.
Absolutely.
And because the devil's in the details, as they say.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
You know, you can get caught. And by the way, that comes back to the cultural challenge. If people see it's not working, they're often apt to sort of back off and say, I told you. I told you this is going to ruin my business. It's too disruptive. Can't do it, right? So I think that's really important as well, that the operational piece is thought through, that it's, you know, it's executed well, and supported as well. So
you know, I couldn't agree more, first of all, and I think you've brought, you know, great insight into this. And, you know, for any serious software company, for any serious subscription company, this is stuff they really have to be able to take care of. Is don't just assume because you have a great product it's going to be adopted, it's going to be utilized. You need customer success managers in there to make sure that that is being actively promoted.
Agreed.
Right. And so for a customer success manager, and we've sort of talked about this throughout the conversation, but you know, what are specific things that you have to do as a customer success manager? So right off the top of my head, I would say, you know, the first thing you have to do is identify what the barriers are. Right? So you have to detect and categorize those barriers. Is this a people barrier? Is this a business barrier? Is this an operational barrier? Right? Is this a tech barrier? Don't forget, there are instances where, you know, everything is working great and then it has one glitch and they find it difficult to call in support and they just stop using it. Right. So that would be a prime example of a tech barrier, right? But again, if you had access to TAC, you know, if you had SNTC and all of that, you could, these are things, but some people don't even know what they have access to, which is the saddest thing of all. They've just, you know, it was such a long time ago when they put the bomb together. They don't remember that they have, you know, SNTC. They don't know that they have Swiss in there. They don't remember any of these details, right? And so stuff goes broken and it's just, oh, okay, I guess it was a good run, right? And so you, as the sales guy or the renewals guy, not the customer success manager in this case, but as the renewals guy, you're coming through and saying, hey, how are you doing? We remember you bought this thing. Now it's time to renew. And say, renew what? This hasn't worked for years, right? And so this is a common technical barrier that you need a customer success manager embedded to be able to identify quickly so you can remind them, hey, you have access to TAC, you have access to all these other forms of support. Even if you don't, this is what I can do for you. As your customer success manager, it's my job to make sure that you have access to the greatest technical support there is. And so just detecting and categorizing the barriers, I would say would be the first thing, right? And then the next thing would be to investigate and resolve. So there's a people barrier. why is there a people barrier? Is it just that John does not like to use WebEx? Does he prefer to travel, right? These are things that you uncover as you engage more, right? Is this a case of, lack of executive sponsorship, like you mentioned, driving this from the top? Maybe, it's just one project manager way down the ladder who's trying to drive this, and that's not enough to get real organization-wide change. So you need to engage someone from the top to really drive this, right? And so you investigate, right, and resolve, right? I think that would be the second biggest thing that a customer success manager has to do in, addressing adoption barriers. And I think the last thing would be to verify. So, hey, as a customer success manager, I'm happy that I was able to find out what the problem was, right? I was able to categorize and say, oh, this is a people barrier, great. And I was able to say, oh, this is John. This is John just not using this, right? Great. And now I've gone and spoken to John, right? And I've spent like a week with him and he's on board and I'm thinking, oh, my job's done. But
it's not
no, you, because an organization is so dynamic, you have to stay on top of it because you don't know what's changing. There's so many moving parts. So you've taken care of John. What about this other department over here that you didn't know about? What about this other, concern that a certain user group has that they haven't brought to you? So even when you feel like you've, addressed that adoption barrier, I think for a customer success manager, it's extremely important to go back and say, let me validate.
Verify.
So how much better are things now than before I went through this whole process?
And what have we missed, if we've missed anything? So as you were chatting there, I was thinking about a couple things that you said. Oftentimes, not only will we deploy in a customer success manager, either directly from Cisco or through the partner that sold the software to the end customer, but oftentimes the end customer, depending on the size of the organization, will actually also have people on board that are responsible for the implementation, right? Now, they may not be called customer success managers, obviously, but they're filling a similar role on behalf of their own organization, and they have an accountability and a responsibility to the company to make sure that it works.
That's right.
And those are wonderful relationships to have and partnerships to establish whereby, Cisco or partner or both are actually working together with a team inside the customer.
Right.
And we've had those opportunities as well. And, they've been incredibly successful because you've got somebody who's feeling accountable and motivated inside the organization.
That's right.
They also are the expert, right? They're the subject matter expert around who's going to move fast, who's going to move slow, where we need to spend time.
That's right.
Right, how we share the data and the visibility. So I think that's really key as well. And often, we're in talking to customers around the transition. It's really key to try and identify those stakeholders and identify them early. And we come back to that whole notion of, early engagement around the transition, what's going to happen, who's going to be involved, what the impact is, and what the experience is going to be from start to finish. I think, to your point, when we go back and we have those conversations around renewal, which of course we all want to have because it's extraordinarily critical to our success and to keeping customers loyal and being sticky, is we want to make sure that we understand that we're not blindsided. There's nothing worse than sitting in front of a customer. You're sitting in front of a CIO and they say, well, you know what, this didn't work. And you don't know because you haven't had a conversation, because you haven't had a customer success manager that's been deployed. You haven't had feedback. You haven't had a mechanism, to bring in that data and analyze it and identify. So I think, it all comes to, back to visibility in the organization, cadence with the right people, strategic alignment, making sure that you've got the right messaging and expectation setting and a plan.
Right. And you know what, speaking to getting customer success managers involved early, another thing that just came to my mind as you were talking is it's also critical to know your customer so that you don't waste your time chasing the wrong thing. So I'll explain. So you have certain kinds of users who you give them a phone, it's the latest smartphone.
Right.
No matter what you tell them, they only want to use that phone for call and text. Right?
Right, sure.
That is not an adoption issue. It's just this is what this customer needs
that's what
this
they need
device
from that
for.
particular technology.
Right. And so you have to go with not just the data, but also those bits of insight that you're able to glean from having proper conversations so you don't waste your time chasing the wrong things. Now, as a customer success manager, your value to that would then be, hey, when it's time to renew or when it's time to, do a tech refresh or an expand, you can say, hey, why not go for a less feature-heavy solution this time? Maybe what you need is this small and you're getting stuff that's this big, right? And so what you do is you create that extra trust because, again, nobody's saying right now, nobody's going and saying, hey, don't buy this $10,000 thing. What you need is this $500 thing, right? But you're a breath of fresh air as a customer success manager. You're saying, hey, you know what? Based on what you've been doing in the last year and based on your usage, we're seeing that you only need this much software, this much, this many features. Maybe you want to consider scoping down what you're purchasing so that you're getting the most value for your, for your expenditure. And so that creates another avenue for, loyalty, for stickiness, because they're saying, hey, that's refreshing. You're not just trying to dump the latest and greatest on us. You're actually looking at our business outcomes, which, if you remember, that's what customer success is all about. And what that means is next time you prescribe something to them, they're more likely to just say, you know what? I trust you. You have our best interests in mind, and we're just going to go with that, right?
I also think, part of that comes back to, and I expect our teams, and I'm sure you do as well, to be identifying the right suites of software at the time of sale for a customer.
That's right.
And so I never want to be in a situation like you just described, to be honest, where a customer hasn't utilized all the features or we've oversold features. I think if we're doing our jobs right, we're positioning the right features and functionality based on the conversations we've had with the customer, based on where they see their growth patterns, how they see the organization developing and growing, and what aspirational goals they have over the next 3 to 5 years that align and co-term with the agreement, right? And so, I think what's really important is the adoption again. So if you've got in your example that you use where, you've got a user who uses 2 features on a phone versus, there's 10 to be utilized. I think it's important, and it's also our responsibility to make sure that, not everybody's going to use 10 features. We get that.
Absolutely.
But we don't want to say it's okay that you're only using 2. That's not okay. We want to make sure that we give people the opportunity to recognize that there's more. There's more efficiencies to be had if you use 4 features or 5 or 6, and here's how you do it. And again, that's around the expansion over time of that adoption, right? So, you might start off saying, listen, I get that you're comfortable with 2, but we're going to move to 3 in 6 months, and we're going to move to 6 in 12 months. And that's why it's important to recognize that adoption is in fact a journey. The expectation that you're going to sell, an enterprise agreement to a customer, and then in the first 12 months, all the technology is adopted, and everybody's happy, and everybody's cranking out at a new level, and it's fantastic. The next 4 years, it's going to be golden. Absolutely not. And I think it's really important to understand that, as we go, there's certain user groups that will be first to deploy because, they're the field, it's the sales team, they've got to be out there. Great. So again, back to prioritization of lines of business. But I do think it's inherently incumbent on us as Cisco and our partner community to make sure we're scoping those opportunities correctly, but that we're also giving a little bit of room to move. I recently bought a new car, and I know how to use about 5% of the features, in the first month. And the second month, I know how to use about 10, 15. But now, it's amazing because I'm so much more productive in the car. I can figure out how to use the touchscreen. I can run calls. I can run my WebEx through my screen. There's all these things, and it's because over time I've kind of figured out how to expand that feature and functionality suite to my benefit.
That's right. Extremely critical, and I really do agree. And just doing the proper scoping right from the start, I think, is critical to customer success down the line.
Baby. Totally agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. I think this conversation was really useful, and I hope that our listeners and viewers have been able to learn something new from this, because adoption is a big part of the customer success journey, and I don't think we talk about it nearly enough. I think a lot of us have been focused for too long in just selling stuff and moving on without caring how much of what we've sold is actually being used, and this is what adoption takes care of. So I really do appreciate you joining us today on Ingram CX Express to talk about adoption and how to identify barriers and how to overcome those barriers, right? And I think one last thing that we like to do before we send our guests away is ask them, what's an interesting thing about you outside of your day job?
Oh boy, there was no prep on this.
No. Completely impromptu.
I'm a car girl, so
Okay.
that's probably the most interesting thing about me. I'm very passionate
Do you
about.
go to races? Do you go to car shows and all of that?
Yeah,
Okay, interesting.
all the above. Yeah,
Cool.
Yeah,
That
big
is
car
really
fan.
nice.
So,
That is really nice.
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks for
asking.
sharing.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for being here.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate you taking the time to watch these series, and I hope that you're learning as we're going along. And I hope that you join us again on our next episode. And make sure you follow us on all our socials and check out our website. Thank you so much.